When you hear the name Knights Templar, you probably think of the Crusades. You think of holy wars, the Holy Grail, Dan Brown novels, and conspiracy theories. You picture men in white mantles charging across the sands of Jerusalem. And you wouldn't be wrong. They were the most feared military unit of the Middle Ages. But if you only see them as warriors, you are missing the most important part of the story. You are missing the machinery that made them possible. Because the Knights Templar weren't just an army. They were a financial institution. In fact, they were the world's first multinational corporation. They were the first group to operationalize international branch banking. They managed assets that dwarfed the GDP of European nations. They developed encryption for financial transfers 500 years before the telegraph. They didn't just fight for God. They acted as the treasurer for kings. But there is an iron law in finance. Leverage cuts both ways. And when you hold the debt of a sovereign who has the power to burn you at the stake, you are playing a dangerous game. This is not a story about religion. This is a story about the invention of modern banking and the violent liquidation event that created Friday the 13th. To understand the rise of the Templars, we have to look at the market conditions of the early 12th century. After the First Crusade in 1099, Jerusalem was back in Christian hands. This triggered a massive boom in tourism, or what was then called pilgrimage. Thousands of Europeans sold their farms and businesses to travel to the Holy Land. But there was a massive logistical problem. There was no visa network. There was no SWIFT system. If you wanted to buy food, lodging, or passage in Jerusalem, you had to carry your net worth in gold and silver coins on your belt. You were a walking bank vault. And the market responded. Bandits, robbers, and local warlords set up choke points along the routes. The pilgrimage became a suicide mission. The cost of doing business was your life. Enter Hugues de Payens, a French nobleman who, along with 8 relatives, founded a new order in 1119. Their original pitch was simple. They would act as a private security contractor for pilgrims. At first, they were destitute. Their seal famously depicted 2 knights riding 1 horse because they couldn't afford a second mount. They were the poor fellow soldiers of Christ. But Hugues de Payens understood something that modern startups realize today. To scale, you need regulatory approval. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Templars received the official backing of the Catholic Church. And 10 years later, Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull called Omni Datum Optimum. In modern financial terms, this was the ultimate regulatory capture. This document granted the Templars total tax exemption. They could cross borders without paying tolls. They answered to no authority on earth except the Pope. Imagine a corporation today that pays no taxes, answers to no local laws, and has its own private army. That was the Templar Order. And with that power, they introduced their killer app. The innovation was born out of necessity. The Templars realized that carrying gold was inefficient and dangerous, so they dematerialized the money. Here is how the system worked. A pilgrim in London would visit the Temple Church, the Templar headquarters in England. He would deposit his funds, let's say 100 gold coins. The Templar treasurer would count the money and issue a piece of parchment. This wasn't just a receipt. It was a letter of credit, but it had a security feature. The Templars used a private encryption code, a cipher based on the Maltese cross that only other Templars could read. This verified the depositor's identity and the amount. The pilgrim could then travel to Jerusalem with nothing but this piece of paper. Even if he was robbed, the thief couldn't cash it. It was biometric 2-factor authentication, medieval style. When the pilgrim arrived in Jerusalem, he went to the Templar HQ, presented the letter, and withdrew his funds in local currency. The Templars charged a transaction fee, of course. Think about the implications of this. The gold didn't move. The value moved. The Templars had effectively increased the velocity of money across Christendom. They became the Western Union of the Crusades. And because they had commanderies in every major city, Paris, London, Rome, Jerusalem, Acre, They were the only organization capable of clearing these transactions. They had a monopoly on international liquidity. With this system in place, the Templars began to accumulate capital at an alarming rate. Pilgrims often left their estates to the order in their wills. Nobles donated land to buy salvation. Soon, the Templars weren't just processing payments. They were managing a massive real estate portfolio. By the mid-13th century, they owned 9,000 manors across Europe. They owned a fleet of ships that rivaled the navies of sovereign states. They even bought the entire island of Cyprus in 1191. They diversified. They ran vineyards, farms, and wool exports. They imported spices. They built their own ports. They were vertically integrated, but their most profitable business was lending. Church law forbade usury, charging interest on loans. But the Templars were creative accountants. Instead of interest, they charged rent, or administrative fees. They structured loans so that the repayment was calculated in a different currency, hiding the profit margin in the exchange rate. They became the bankers to the kings of France and England. The French royal treasury was actually physically stored inside the Paris Temple for safekeeping. The Templars were essentially the Federal Reserve, the IMF, and BlackRock rolled into one. They were the center of gravity for the European economy. But this level of success creates a dangerous dynamic. When you are the creditor to the king, you hold power over him, and kings do not like to be powerless. Enter King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair for his good looks, but he should have been known as Philip the Broke. By the early 1300s, France was in a financial death spiral. Philip had waged costly wars against England and Flanders. He had borrowed heavily from the Templars to finance these campaigns. He tried everything to fix the deficit. He expelled the Jews and seized their assets. He expelled the Lombard bankers. He debased the currency, reducing the silver content of coins, which triggered hyperinflation and riots in Paris. Nothing worked. He still owed the Templars a fortune. And the Templars, now led by the elderly Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were refusing to forgive the debt. Philip realized he had two choices: repay the loan or eliminate the lender. He chose the latter. The operation was planned with CIA-level secrecy. Philip couldn't just attack the Templars. They were a military order with papal immunity. He needed a legal pretext. He utilized his spies to fabricate a dossier. He accused the Templars of heresy, spitting on the cross, idolatry, and sodomy. It didn't matter if it was true. It only mattered that it was shocking enough to freeze their assets. On the dawn of Friday, October 13, 1307, Philip's agents opened sealed orders. In a synchronized raid across France, hundreds of Templars were arrested in their beds. It was the first hostile takeover in corporate history. Philip seized the temple treasury. He took the gold, the silver, and most importantly, the ledgers. The debt was effectively cancelled. The Templars were tortured into false confessions. The Pope, Clement V, was weak and under Philip's influence. He dissolved the order in 1312. The final scene of this financial tragedy played out on an island in the Seine River in Paris. Jacques de Molay, the last CEO of the Templar Corporation, recanted his confession. He asserted the order's innocence. Philip ordered him burned alive immediately. Legend says that as the flames rose, de Molay cursed the king and the pope, summoning them to meet him before the tribunal of God within a year. Coincidence or not, Pope Clement died a month later. King Philip died in a hunting accident later that year. But while the men died, the idea survived. The Knights Templar showed the world the power of financial abstraction. They proved that money isn't just metal coins. It's information. It's trust. It's a network. They built a system that allowed capital to flow freely across borders, fueling trade and economic expansion. They were the architects of the financial infrastructure we use today. Every time you swipe a credit card, every time you send a wire transfer, you are using a derivative of the system invented by a group of warrior monks in 1119. They were the masters of leverage, but they forgot the most fundamental rule of risk management. Never lend more money to a king than you can afford to lose. I'm Name, and this is Historiq Finance.